The most important consideration I make when programming the counter movement jump for basketball athletes is chasing an improvement in strategy. Now, when I program specific exercises, I keep that in mind. Does this exercise lead to an improvement in strategy, or does it cater to that outcome measure that I'm chasing? Now, if I compare a couple exercises, you'll see what I mean. If I implement a kettlebell swing or I use weightlifting exercises and I believe that's improving the power and the rate of force development, etc., of that athlete, then I'm with you. If you're using those exercises and you think that's going to lead to an improvement in strategy of the counter movement jump for the athlete, then I don't necessarily think those two things are going to lead, or that is going to lead to an improvement in the CMJ. Because the biggest issue I see with basketball players in their strategy for a counter movement jump is I see a lot of hip flexion and a torso dropping towards the ground. Why do I see that? Because a basketball player, how are they going to load the elastics that they want to use to jump? Well, if they can show hip flexion, we can load hamstrings, and then a lot of them will show this plantar flexion to find Achilles, and then have this sort of situation by the time they start pushing into the jump. Another reason why they have a tendency to use this strategy is because of the hesitancy to flex at ankles, knees, hips, because that may be agitating to some part of their knee. Not every basketball player, but it's a nice strategy for those guys who have a lot of wear and tear on the knees to try to use this strategy with eyes looking up towards ball, vertex, whatever it may be. So when choosing exercises, understand that that pattern might be exacerbating something negative that you're actually trying to improve. For instance, in weightlifting, if we use the hang power clean as an example, which necessitates an eccentric flexion at hip to get to the top of knee, and then a pull and catch in an athletic position. A lot of good things can happen there if that exercise is trainable. But what I see with that exercise is a lot of hip flexion here, having to look forward here, which is similar to that strategy I described before, that strategy of avoidance. So I think another interesting piece about the hang power clean example is for those who have taught weightlifting exercises before or included them in a program, you understand this double knee bend that happens as you move from, as I would call it, this hang position or position 2 to a high hang position or position 1. So I'm drawing that bar closer into my center of gravity as my knees come forward slightly. So I kind of get to this upright position that's advantageous to a push and then catch. So what do you see at that high hang position? You see more of that strategy that I would like to see in a counter movement jump. At position 2 or that hang position, I don't necessarily see that same strategy that I'm chasing with my basketball athlete. So if that's something you would want to implement into your program as far as weightlifting goes, I would implore you to consider a higher hang position, maybe, if you want to be more specific. Not something I would program in there, but if you are someone who really likes weightlifting included in their program or included in a basketball player's program, I would imagine that mimicking something from this high hang, which for me may not be enough of a range to really foster a training effect, but as an example, again, I see this as a great position to then push and catch from. Again, not really knowing the advantages that I would see from that, but I think that's an option. Now, if I'm trying to change somebody's strategy, especially someone who is specialized in a particular sport and has a small window of adaptation, I believe that in the program we should include everything we can to foster the strategy that we believe will be more advantageous to keep that athlete healthy and hopefully maintain those athletic qualities that allows them to be so bouncy or to be to play at this NBA level or this professional level. So understand some of the general nature of some exercises like a kettlebell swing or some sort of weightlifting variation that necessitates a lot of hip flexion and not a lot of dorsiflexion, knee flexion, and understand that that might be placed in the initial portions of the program as something more general. But as time goes along, I would think that I would drift away from those a little bit. If I'm getting more specific to the needs of the athlete, I'd be spending less time on these dynamic movements that don't necessitate what my athlete needs to be doing, i.e., jumping with a great strategy. Let me put more time into that piece and implement things like weighted jumps or simply counter movement jumps periodized in a way where we may be attacking elasticity, or we may be adding resistance to chase some sort of force, rate of force development, whether that's eccentric loading or concentric pushing. I would rather see something that looked more like a jump, in other words, in most of the training, versus something that looks a bit more general in nature.